Sarah Martinez was mid-sentence when the door exploded open. "Nobody move." Military police flooded the veteran support group meeting, weapons drawn. Sarah's coffee mug shattered on the floor as rough hands yanked her arms behind her back. "Sarah Martinez, you're under arrest for stolen valor and fraud." The other veterans stared in shock as she was dragged away in handcuffs. The evening had started like any other Tuesday at the Riverside Community Center. 12 veterans sat in a circle of mismatched chairs, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across faces marked by invisible wounds. Sarah had been coming to these meetings for 8 months, always sitting in the same spot by the window, always arriving exactly 5 minutes early. She spoke rarely, but when she did, her words carried weight that made the others lean forward. Tonight had been different. Marcus Webb, a former Army sergeant with a beer gut and a chip on his shoulder, had been dominating the conversation with increasingly embellished stories about his deployment to Afghanistan. Sarah had listened patiently, her jaw tightening with each exaggeration, until Marcus claimed he'd single-handedly taken out a Taliban stronghold. "That's not how it works," Sarah had said quietly, her voice cutting through Marcus's bluster like a blade. "You don't just storm a compound alone. There are protocols, backup, extraction plans. Real combat isn't a video game." Marcus's face had flushed red. "Oh, and what would you know about it, sweetheart? You fix cars for a living." The room had gone silent. Everyone knew Sarah worked at Jimmy's auto shop downtown, her hands perpetually stained with grease, her uniform coveralls hiding whatever lay beneath. She was unremarkable in every way that mattered to people like Marcus. Small-framed, quiet, with shoulder-length brown hair that she kept tied back in a practical ponytail. "I know because I was there," Sarah had said, her voice steady despite the tremor that had started in her hands. Syria, 2019. Our unit was tasked with infiltrating a high-value target compound outside Raqqa. Intelligence suggested they were holding American hostages. The group had exchanged glances. Sarah had never shared details about her service before, only vague references to overseas deployment when pressed. Now, she was speaking with the clinical precision of someone recounting a mission briefing. "We went in at 0300 hours, 4-person team. The intel was wrong. It was a trap. They were waiting for us." Her voice had grown distant, her eyes focusing on something beyond the community center's water-stained ceiling. "The first IED took out our communications. The second one," she touched her collarbone unconsciously, where 3 parallel scars disappeared beneath her flannel shirt. Marcus had scoffed. "Right, and I suppose you were Special Forces? Navy SEAL, maybe?" His tone dripped with sarcasm. "Come on, lady. Women can't even pass SEAL training, let alone serve in combat units." "Actually," Sarah had said, meeting his gaze directly, "I was a SEAL. Team 6, Specialized Maritime Operations. My call sign was Phantom." The room had erupted. Half the veterans laughed outright, while others shifted uncomfortably. Marcus had pulled out his phone, fingers flying across the screen. "This is bullshit. I'm calling this in. Stolen valor is a federal crime, and I'm not sitting here listening to some wannabe mechanic disrespect real warriors." Sarah had remained calm even as Marcus made his call to the military police hotline. She'd sat perfectly still, her breathing controlled, while he'd ranted about fraudulent claims and disrespectful civilians. The other veterans had tried to defuse the situation, but Marcus was beyond reason. "You want to know what real combat looks like?" Sarah had asked quietly while they waited. "It's not heroic. It's not glorious. It's watching your teammate bleed out in your arms while you're zip-tied to a chair, listening to them scream your real name over and over until they finally break and tell the enemy everything they want to know." The room had gone dead silent. Even Marcus had stopped his pacing. It's spending 4 months in a cell that's too small to stand up in, eating rice and cockroaches, while they try to break you with everything from waterboarding to electric shocks. It's escaping by killing 3 guards with a piece of broken concrete and then walking 47 miles through hostile territory with a dislocated shoulder and internal bleeding. Her voice had never wavered, never changed inflection. She'd recited the details like she was reading from a grocery list, but her hands had been shaking so badly she'd had to clasp them together. It's coming home to a country that erased every record of your service, gave you a new identity, and told you to forget everything that happened because it was too classified for the history books. It's working as a mechanic because that's the only job they could arrange that wouldn't require a background check that might expose operations that officially never happened. That's when the door had exploded open. Now, as the police car pulled away from the community center, Sarah caught her reflection in the window. She looked exactly like what she was supposed to be, a 34-year-old mechanic who lived quietly in a studio apartment above the Chinese restaurant on 5th Street. Someone unremarkable, someone forgettable, someone who definitely wasn't a decorated Navy SEAL with more confirmed kills than most people had birthdays. But the 3 parallel scars across her collarbone told a different story. And somewhere in a classified file that officially didn't exist, Admiral Rebecca Torres was about to get a phone call that would change everything. Detective Ray Coleman slammed the case file shut in frustration, the sound echoing through the empty bullpen at 2:47 a.m. 3 days of interrogation, and Sarah Martinez hadn't cracked once. Every other stolen valor case he'd handled fell apart within hours. The frauds always slipped up on basic military knowledge, got their ranks wrong, or couldn't explain why they had no documentation. But Sarah was different. Sarah was a goddamn enigma wrapped in coveralls and motor oil. Coleman rubbed his eyes and opened the file again, spreading the contents across his desk like pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit together. On one side, a woman who didn't exist in any military database, had no service records, no discharge papers, no veterans benefits, nothing. On the other side, someone who knew things that made his 20-year law enforcement career feel like amateur hour. The first red flag had come during hour 2 of the initial interrogation. Coleman had tried the standard trick, throwing out fake military terminology to see if she'd bite. So tell me about your experience with tactical soup sandwiches in the field. Sarah had looked at him like he'd grown a second head. Detective, there's no such thing as a tactical soup sandwich. That's not military jargon. That's something you picked up from a bad movie. A soup sandwich is slang for something that's completely messed up, but you don't put tactical in front of it. Are you actually trying to test me? Or do you just not know what you're talking about? Strike 1 for the detective. Hour 4 had been worse. Coleman had brought in Sergeant Major Patricia Hayes from the local recruiting station, figuring a real military professional could expose the fraud. Hayes had spent 30 minutes grilling Sarah about everything from basic training, protocols to advanced combat techniques. Sarah had answered every question with the kind of casual precision that only came from lived experience. Describe the sound of incoming mortar fire, Hayes had demanded. Depends on the distance and trajectory. Sarah had replied without hesitation. Close impact sounds like a freight train mixed with thunder. Distant ones whistle first, high-pitched, almost musical before the boom. But the really dangerous ones, the ones that are going to land right on top of you, they don't whistle at all. They just arrive. Hayes had gone pale. She'd pulled Coleman aside afterward, her voice shaking. Ray, I've been in the Army for 18 years. I've served 3 tours in Afghanistan. That woman just described incoming fire better than most of my combat veterans. Either she's the most dedicated fraud I've ever met, or ... Or what? Or she's telling the truth, and there's something very wrong with this picture. By day 2, Coleman had started losing sleep. Sarah's knowledge wasn't just accurate. It was specific in ways that suggested classified information. She'd mentioned weapon systems that weren't supposed to exist, described tactics that weren't in any manual he could find, and referenced operations that had no public record. "Tell me about your training," he'd pressed during one session. "Which part? Basic underwater demolition? Advanced marksmanship? Survival, evasion, resistance, and escape? Or are you asking about the specialized programs that don't have names?" The specialized programs. Sarah had studied him for a long moment. "Detective, if I told you about those programs, you'd either think I was completely insane, or you'd have to kill me to protect national security. Neither option seems particularly appealing." The breakthrough, if you could call it that, had come when Coleman brought in Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a psychiatrist who specialized in PTSD cases. Walsh was supposed to evaluate Sarah's mental state, determine if she was delusional or simply lying. Instead, she'd emerged from the session looking like she'd seen a ghost. "Ray, we need to talk. Privately." In the hallway, Walsh had grabbed his arm with trembling fingers. That woman has been through trauma that would break most people. The way she describes her captivity, the specific details about torture techniques, the psychological markers. This isn't something you can fake or research. This is lived experience. But there's no record of her service. Then maybe the records are wrong. Or maybe they don't exist for a reason. That night, Coleman had done something he'd never done before in 20 years of police work. He'd started making unofficial calls to contacts in federal agencies, asking vague questions about classified military units and black operations. Most had hung up on him. A few had told him to drop it and forget he'd ever asked. One, a former FBI agent named Torres, who now worked for some unnamed government agency, had listened to his questions in complete silence before saying, "Detective Coleman, you're about to step into waters that are way over your head. My advice? Process the paperwork, file the case, and forget this woman exists." But Coleman couldn't forget. Because on day 3, Sarah had done something that changed everything. He'd been pressing her about her supposed escape from captivity, demanding details that could be verified. Sarah had been patient, almost gentle in her responses, like she was talking to a child who couldn't understand basic concepts. "You want proof, detectives? Something concrete?" She'd rolled up her left sleeve, revealing a forearm covered in what looked like random scars. "These aren't random, they're a map." Coleman had leaned forward despite himself. "Latitude and longitude coordinates, carved into my arm with a piece of broken glass during my 3rd month in captivity. The location of the compound where they held me. The coordinates of the mass grave where they buried the other prisoners. The GPS location of the weapons cache they were planning to use for their next attack." She'd traced the scars with her finger, and Coleman realized they weren't random at all. They were numbers, carved deep enough to be permanent, precise enough to be functional. "I memorized everything, detective. Every face, every voice, every detail of that compound. Because I knew that someday, someone would need that information. The question is, are you brave enough to verify it?" Coleman had stared at those scars. For a full minute, his mind racing. If Sarah was lying, she was the most dedicated fraud in history. If she was telling the truth, if she was telling the truth, then someone very powerful had gone to extraordinary lengths to erase her existence. And that someone was about to discover that their carefully constructed lie was unraveling in a small-town police station. One question at a time, Coleman reached for his phone. It was time to make a call that would either end his career or change everything he thought he knew about the war on terror. The number he dialed belonged to Admiral Rebecca Torres, and it was about to ring in a secure facility that officially didn't exist. Admiral Rebecca Torres hadn't set foot in a civilian police station in 15 years, but the encrypted call from NCIS had shattered her Tuesday morning like a sledgehammer through glass. She'd been reviewing budget reports in her Pentagon office when Agent Martinez, no relation, just cosmic irony, had delivered the news that made her blood turn to ice water. "Ma'am, we have a situation. A woman named Sarah Martinez has been arrested for stolen valor. She's claiming to be former Navy SEAL, Team 6. The local detective is asking questions about classified operations." Torres had dropped her coffee mug. The black liquid spread across classified documents like spilled blood. "What did you say the name was?" "Sarah Martinez, ma'am. Age 34, currently employed as a mechanic in. I'll be there in 2 hours." The drive from Washington to the small Pennsylvania town had given Torres time to think, and thinking was the last thing she wanted to do. Sarah Martinez. The name belonged to a ghost, a woman who was supposed to be dead, buried in a classified file so deep that even Torres needed special clearance to access it. But ghosts had a way of coming back to haunt you, especially when you'd been the one to kill them. Now she walked through the Riverside Police Department like she owned it. Her dress blues commanding instant respect from every officer she passed. The ribbons on her chest told a story of 3 decades in naval intelligence, operations that had shaped the modern world in ways the public would never know. But none of those ribbons represented her greatest success or her most devastating failure. Detective Coleman intercepted her at the front desk. A tired-looking man with intelligent eyes and the kind of stubborn jaw that meant trouble. "Admiral Torres? I'm Detective Coleman. I have to say, I wasn't expecting." "Son," Torres cut him off with a stare that had intimidated foreign diplomats and terrorist leaders alike. "You're about to step into waters so deep, they don't appear on any map. Where is she?" Coleman led her through a maze of corridors, talking rapidly about evidence and jurisdiction and proper procedure. Torres let him talk while her mind raced through possibilities. How had Sarah survived? The last intelligence report had been definitive. All members of Unit 77 were KIA, their bodies recovered and buried with full military honors in Arlington. Torres had personally delivered the folded flags to their families, had looked into the eyes of Sarah's mother, and lied with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent her career protecting national secrets. But if Sarah was alive, if she'd somehow escaped— "She's been here 3 days, Coleman was saying. "Won't break, won't change her story. Claims she was part of some classified unit, says her records were erased. I've never seen anything like it, Admiral. Either she's the most dedicated fraud in history, or she's telling the truth." Torres finished quietly. They stopped outside Interrogation Room 3. Through the one-way glass, Torres could see a small woman sitting perfectly still at a metal table. Sarah looked older, worn down by years of living a lie, but her posture was unmistakable. Even in civilian clothes, even after all this time. She sat like a soldier, like a SEAL. Torres felt the weight of 5 years crash down on her shoulders. 5 years of believing she'd sent 12 of the Navy's finest warriors to their deaths. 5 years of carrying the guilt of Operation Nightfall, the mission that was supposed to end the war on terror and instead had ended in catastrophe. "I need to see her alone," Torres said. "Ma'am, this is an active investigation. I can't just—" Torres turned to face him, and Coleman saw something in her eyes that made him step back. "Detective, what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. That woman in there isn't just a veteran. She's a weapon. A living, breathing piece of military hardware that was designed to do things that would give you nightmares. And if she's really who I think she is, then we have a problem that goes way beyond stolen valor." Coleman swallowed hard. What kind of problem? The kind that could start a war. Torres entered the interrogation room alone, her heart hammering against her ribs. Sarah looked up, and for a moment, time stopped. The years fell away, and Torres was back in the briefing room at Naval Special Warfare Command, looking at 12 women who had volunteered for the most dangerous mission in SEAL history. Admiral Torres? Sarah's voice cracked like a teenager's, all her carefully maintained composure crumbling in an instant. But they told me you were dead. The whole unit. They said everyone was KIA. Torres sat down slowly, studying the woman across from her. Sarah looked like a civilian, like someone who'd never held a weapon or taken a life. But Torres knew better. She knew what lay beneath the mechanic's coveralls and the carefully constructed ordinary life. "Show me your left shoulder blade," Torres said quietly. Sarah hesitated, her eyes darting to the one-way mirror. "Admiral, there are people watching. Show me." Sarah slowly turned and lifted her shirt. There, hidden beneath a colorful butterfly tattoo that was clearly a later addition, was a small black anchor with a trident. But it was the number beneath it that made Torres's breath catch. 77. The unit that officially never existed. The program that had been buried so deep that even mentioning it was treason. "Jesus Christ," Torres whispered. "You're really alive." Sarah turned back around, tears streaming down her face. "I've been trying to tell them for 3 days. I've been trying to tell someone for 5 years. But nobody believes me because I don't exist anymore, do I? You made sure of that." The accusation hit Torres like a physical blow, because Sarah was right. Torres had been the one to authorize the cover-up, the one who decided that the truth about Operation Nightfall was too dangerous to ever see daylight. She'd erased 12 women from history to protect a secret that could topple governments. "Sarah, you have to understand." "Understand what?" Sarah's voice was rising. 5 years of suppressed rage finally breaking free. "That you left me to die? That you told my mother I was dead while I was being tortured in the Syrian prison? That you gave me a fake identity and a fake life, and told me to forget everything I'd sacrificed for this country?" Torres felt the walls closing in. Through the glass, she could see Detective Coleman watching intently, probably recording every word. This conversation was supposed to be damage control, a quiet cleanup of a situation that threatened to expose one of the military's darkest secrets. Instead, it was turning into a reckoning that was 5 years overdue. "The mission was compromised," Torres said carefully. "We had intelligence that suggested." "The mission was a setup," Sarah interrupted. "We walked into a trap because someone in your chain of command sold us out. And instead of investigating, instead of finding out who betrayed us, you decided it was easier to pretend we never existed." The truth hung in the air between them like a loaded weapon. Torres had suspected as much, had spent sleepless nights wondering how the enemy had known exactly when and where Unit 77 would strike. But investigating would have meant admitting the unit existed, would have meant congressional hearings and media attention and the end of programs that were keeping America safe. "There were larger considerations," Torres said weakly. "Larger than the lives of 12 women who trusted you." Torres closed her eyes. When she opened them, Sarah was staring at her with the kind of cold fury that Torres had seen in the eyes of enemy combatants. It was the look of someone who had nothing left to lose. "You want to know what really happened in Syria, Admiral? You want to know what your larger considerations cost?" Torres nodded, though every instinct screamed at her to stop this conversation before it went any further. Sarah leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than a shout. "Then buckle up, because you're about to learn why some secrets are too dangerous to keep." Torres cleared the room with a single word: "Out." Her voice carried the authority of 3 decades in naval intelligence. and Detective Coleman found himself in the hallway before he'd consciously decided to move. Through the one-way glass, he watched the Admiral lock the door and activate a small device that would scramble any recording equipment in the room. Whatever was about to happen, it was going off the books. When they were alone, Sarah finally broke down. The careful composure she'd maintained for 3 days shattered like glass, and tears streamed down her face as 5 years of suppressed trauma came flooding back. "They told me you were dead, Admiral. The whole unit. They said everyone was KIA when they pulled me out." Torres sat across from her, seeing not the broken woman before her, but the fierce warrior who'd volunteered for the most dangerous mission in SEAL history. Sarah Phantom Martinez had been the best of the best, a sniper who could put a bullet through a keyhole at 800 yards, a linguist who spoke 4 Middle Eastern dialects fluently, and a soldier who'd never failed a mission. Until Operation Nightfall, we had to let the world think that Martinez, including you. Torres's voice was heavy with 5 years of guilt. The alternative was worse. Worse than letting me believe my entire team was dead. Worse than giving me a fake identity and telling me to forget everything I'd sacrificed. Sarah's voice cracked. "Do you have any idea what it's like to grieve for people who are actually alive? To carry that guilt every single day?" Torres pulled out a tablet and entered a series of codes that would have triggered alarms in 3 different government agencies. The screen flickered to life, showing classified files that officially didn't exist. "Your team isn't dead, Sarah. They're all alive, all living under new identities, all believing the same thing you believed, that they're the only survivor." Sarah stared at the screen in shock. There were photos, recent ones. Rodriguez working as a nurse in Seattle, Chun teaching martial arts in Denver, Williams running a small bookstore in Maine. All of them alive, all of them ghosts like her. "Why?" Sarah whispered. "Why did you do this to us?" Torres closed the tablet and leaned back in her chair. "Because Operation Nightfall wasn't just a mission, Sarah. It was a test, a proof of concept for a new kind of warfare. 12 women operating in deep cover, capable of infiltrating terrorist organizations in ways that male operatives never could. You weren't just SEALs. You were the future of special operations." The truth spilled out in fragments, each revelation more devastating than the last. Unit 77 had been the Pentagon's most classified program, a joint operation between Naval Special Warfare and the CIA. The mission to Syria had been their first major deployment, designed to infiltrate a terrorist cell that was planning attacks on American soil. The intelligence was solid. Torres continued. "We had a source inside the organization, someone who'd been feeding us information for months. The plan was simple. Get in, identify the leadership, eliminate the threat. Get out. Clean and surgical." "But it was a trap," Sarah said, her voice hollow. "The biggest trap in the history of modern warfare. Our source wasn't just compromised. He was a double agent from the beginning. The entire terrorist cell was a front, designed specifically to lure an American Special Operations Forces. They knew we were coming before we even left the base." Sarah closed her eyes, remembering the night everything went wrong. The team had inserted via submarine, swimming 2 miles to shore in the dead of night. The compound had been exactly where intelligence said it would be. The guards positioned exactly as briefed. It had felt too easy, but they'd been trained to trust their intel. "We walked right into it," Sarah said. 12 of the Navy's best, and we walked right into it like amateurs. "You walked into the most sophisticated ambush in military history," Torres corrected. "The enemy had been planning it for over a year, studying American tactics, learning our procedures. They knew exactly how we'd approach the target, exactly how we'd react when things went wrong. The ambush had been perfect. The first explosion had taken out their communications, cutting them off from extraction. The second had collapsed part of the building, separating the team. By the time Sarah realized what was happening, half her unit was already captured. "I watched them take Rodriguez," Sarah said, her voice barely audible. "She was 20 feet away from me, and I couldn't do anything. They had her zip-tied and hooded before I could even raise my weapon. The enemy wanted prisoners," Torres explained. "They wanted to study you, to learn how American female operatives were trained. You represented something they'd never encountered before. Women who could fight like men, who could infiltrate their organizations, who could turn their own cultural assumptions against them." Sarah had been the last one captured, holding out for 6 hours in the ruins of the compound before they'd finally cornered her. She'd killed 11 enemy combatants before they'd taken her down with a tranquilizer dart. And even then, she'd nearly escaped twice during transport. 4 months, Sarah said. 4 months of hell, and you left us there. "We tried everything," Torres said, and for the first time, her voice broke. "Every extraction plan, every diplomatic channel, every backdoor negotiation. But the enemy wasn't interested in prisoner exchanges or ransom demands. They wanted to break you, to prove that American women weren't as tough as American men." The torture had been systematic, designed not just to extract information, but to destroy their sense of identity. The enemy had studied psychological warfare, had known exactly how to attack the minds of elite soldiers. They'd used everything from waterboarding to sexual assault, from sleep deprivation to psychological manipulation. "They made us watch," Sarah said, her voice distant. "Every time one of us broke, they made the others watch. They wanted us to see each other's weakness, to lose faith in our training, in our country, in ourselves. But you didn't break," Torres said quietly. "None of you broke completely. Even when they thought they had you, you were planning your escape." Sarah's escape had been the stuff of legend, though the legend would never be told. She'd spent weeks loosening a piece of concrete in her cell wall, working on it for minutes at a time when the guards weren't watching. When the opportunity finally came, she'd used it to kill 3 guards and fight her way out of the compound. 47 miles, Sarah said. 47 miles through hostile territory with a dislocated shoulder and internal bleeding. "I walked for 3 days, hiding during daylight, following the North Star like some kind of medieval pilgrim." "You saved yourself," Torres said. "And in doing so, you saved the program." "What do you mean?" Torres activated the tablet again, showing Sarah classified reports from the aftermath of her escape. "Your escape route led our forces directly to the compound. We were able to extract the rest of your team within 72 hours. But more importantly, we captured the entire terrorist network, including the double agent who'd set you up." Sarah stared at the screen, seeing photos of her teammates being loaded onto medical helicopters, alive but broken. "They're really alive? All of them. Physically, anyway. Psychologically, ... double quotes, Torres shrugged. "That's why we had to erase you all. The mission was too classified to acknowledge, but the trauma was too severe to ignore. We gave you all new identities, new lives, a chance to heal without the burden of carrying state secrets. But we weren't healing," Sarah said. "We were dying inside, believing we were alone, believing we'd failed." "I know," Torres said, and the weight of 5 years of guilt was evident in her voice. "I made the wrong call. I thought I was protecting you, protecting the program, protecting national security. Instead, I was just protecting my own career." Sarah studied the Admiral's face, seeing the toll that the cover-up had taken. Torres looked older than her years, worn down by the weight of secrets and the knowledge that her decisions had destroyed the lives of 12 women who trusted her. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. Torres was quiet for a long moment, considering options that all led to the same conclusion. "Now we fix this. All of it. I'm going to reunite your team, give you back your real identities, and make sure you get the recognition you deserve. And the program? Unit 77 is being reactivated. With proper oversight this time, proper support systems, proper accountability. The Pentagon has finally realized that the future of special operations isn't just about bigger guns and better technology. It's about soldiers who can think differently, who can see opportunities that others miss. Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in 5 years: hope. And the people responsible for the ambush. Torres smiled, and it was the cold smile of someone who'd spent decades in the intelligence community. Let's just say that justice has a long memory and even longer reach. Within hours, all charges against Sarah Martinez were dropped. The official report stated that the case had been dismissed due to lack of evidence, but Detective Coleman knew better. He'd seen the look in Admiral Torres's eyes, had heard enough of their conversation to understand that he'd stumbled into something far bigger than stolen valor. That night, Sarah Martinez officially died in a car accident on Route 15. The woman who walked out of the police station had a new name, a new life, and finally, the recognition that she'd earned the right to call herself a SEAL. But more importantly, she had something she'd lost 5 years ago in a Syrian prison. She had her team back. The reunion would happen in a secure facility outside Washington, where 12 women would see each other for the first time since the night their world had ended. They would cry. They would rage. They would grieve for the years they'd lost. But they would do it together, as a unit, as sisters who'd been through hell and survived. And somewhere in the Pentagon, Admiral Rebecca Torres would begin the long process of rebuilding Unit 77, knowing that this time she wouldn't let politics and secrecy destroy the lives of the warriors who trusted her with everything. The ghosts were coming home.